She couldn't move. Neither can she even speak. He was too busy that he didn't notice the blood on her sleeve. Every one of her instincts screamed to run, but the shadow waited, patient and silent. And then she realized she wasn't followed. She was summoned. What happened next changed everything. Before we continue, I would like to ask for a small favor. I would like it if you could help me hit the subscribe button. It's a sign that we are doing the right thing and giving the best story you can relate to. Let us know where you are watching from. What's coming next will crack open everything you think you understand about Jessie, love, and the cost of survival. Let us now go back to our character. The kettle shrieked before Jessie remembered she hadn't filled it with water. Another small failure in a week full of them. Steam hissed from the scorched metal as she yanked it off the burner, nearly knocking over the stack of unopened envelopes crowding her stove. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, like the walls were inching closer, suffocating her with every reminder of what she owed and what she didn't have. Medical bills littered the kitchen table, fanned out like a deck meant for a magician's cruel trick. Final notice. Urgent. Balance due. $14,872. They blurred together until the words lost meaning and became nothing but shapes of exhaustion. Jessie Monroe, 32, former painter with dreams big enough to fill the old warehouse she used to rent studio space in, now reduced to a gallery assistant who sometimes skipped lunch because every dollar mattered. In the hospital, her mother's hand had felt too light, like bird bones wrapped in parchment. Jessie rubbed it gently, afraid she might break it by holding on too tightly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold hum matching the antiseptic bite in the air. Her mother smiled, a thin, papery thing. "I'm sorry I'm dying expensive," she whispered, trying for humor, failing. Jessie's throat closed. She'd laughed anyway, because what else could she do? Hours later, she sat in the hospital parking lot, forehead pressed to the steering wheel. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness. Checking account balance, $247.19. She tried to breathe, but the numbers carved into her ribs like a warning. Her mother's next treatment was scheduled for Friday. When Jessie lifted her purse to find her keys, something fell out. An elegant, cream-colored business card. Minimalist. Embossed. Expensive. Mikhail Volkov. Her hands shook as she picked it up. She didn't remember putting it there. A week earlier, the gallery was unusually quiet. Rain tapping a steady rhythm against the windows, the kind that made even wealthy patrons prefer staying home. Jessie adjusted one of the smaller canvases in her exhibit, nudging the frame until it sat perfectly straight. Her paintings usually didn't draw high bidders, but tonight she'd hoped for at least one sale. Something modest. Something that might chip away at the mountain of debt crushing her. She didn't hear Mikhail enter. She felt him. The air changed, tightened, as if the room recognized power before she did. He moved with certainty, not browsing but claiming space with each measured step. His suit was tailored so precisely it seemed woven directly onto his body. His eyes, dark, sharp, assessing, didn't wander over her curves like most rich men did. Instead, they fixed on the paintings. Hers. He stopped in front of the large canvas she'd painted the night she almost gave up on hope entirely. A fractured figure reaching for something just out of frame. "You made this," he said. Not a question. Jessie swallowed. "Yes." He nodded once, like a man confirming a private suspicion. "I'll take them all." She blinked. "All?" "All of your pieces." His voice was smooth, an accent threading through the words like silk around steel. 200,000 wired today. She almost laughed. People didn't buy art like that, not hers. Why? His eyes flicked to her, a subtle glint of surprise or amusement. I recognize talent and investment potential. He pulled out a card and held it between two fingers. I have a proposition for someone with your particular elegance. The way he said it made the word feel dangerous. Not sexual, not dismissive, but intentional. She hesitated, instinct screaming at her to walk away. Then she remembered her mother's hospital room, the faint smell of decay under antiseptic. She took the card. The elevator ride to Mikhail's penthouse felt too fast, too smooth, like the machine itself respected the man who owned it. When the doors opened, Jessie stepped into a world that didn't feel real. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the top of Manhattan, the city shrinking beneath them as if built from glass and ambition. Everything in the penthouse gleamed: marble floors, chrome fixtures, furniture arranged with mathematical precision. Mikhail stood by the windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the skyline. "Ms. Monroe," he said without turning, "thank you for coming. Your assistant said it was urgent." "It is." He faced her fully now. Something unreadable passed through his expression. Approval? Calculation. "I'm offering a contract. 6 months. $500,000. Her pulse stumbled. "What kind of contract?" "Public appearances. Private companionship. Absolute discretion. You will belong to me completely." She stiffened. "So I'm an escort?" "Wrong word." He stepped closer. "I require someone with intelligence, poise, someone who can navigate dangerous rooms." His gaze brushed over her, not lustful, but appraising, as though he saw something in her she didn't even know existed. "You will have medical care for your mother. The best. Already arranged, if you agree." He handed her the contract. Heavy paper, ink crisp and final. Clauses detailing her duties, his obligations. NDA. Loyalty. Availability. A world she barely understood spelled out in legal precision. Her hand trembled. "Why me?" "Because elegance is not purchased," he said quietly. "It is earned through suffering. You wear it like a second skin." Jessie signed before she could change her mind. "This is business," she said, forcing the word steady. Mikhail's smile was almost soft. "We'll see about that." He stepped back, voice turning crisp. "You'll move in tomorrow. Bring nothing but photographs. Everything else will be provided." The first month unfolded like a series of beautifully choreographed scenes Jessie was only pretending to belong in. She stood still while stylists zipped gowns made of whisper-light silk, draped diamonds around her throat, and slid rings onto her fingers that cost more than the rent she'd struggled to pay for years. They never asked what she liked. They simply transformed her into the woman Mikhail required, elegance incarnate, sculpted from other people's money. Dinners became performances. Silent, luxurious, unsettling. Waiters glided around their table without ever meeting her eyes. Across from her, Mikhail cut his steak with the precision of a surgeon, discussing mergers and territory with politicians who pretended not to be criminals and criminals who pretended not to own the politicians. Jessie learned to smile at the right moments, sip champagne, and pretend she didn't understand when violence slipped casually into the conversation between toasts. She told herself it was theater. She was playing a role, nothing more. Mikhail would murmur instructions under his breath. "Wear this. Stand here. Don't speak." Each command slid into her ears like cool metal, and she obeyed because obedience meant her mother lived another month, maybe 2. What unsettled her most wasn't the danger. It was Mikhail himself. He never touched her inappropriately in public. His hand might guide her lower back, but never lingered. His eyes claimed her, but with a strange respect threaded through the possession. People feared him, but the fear wasn't loud, it was reverent. The illusion cracked at a dinner in Midtown. A business associate leaned too close, muttering something crude about Jessie's mouth. Before she could recoil, Mikhail's champagne flute was in his fist, then slamming into the man's face. The crunch echoed across the table. Jessie should have been horrified. Instead, she felt protected. They drove in silence that night, Manhattan lights blurring past the tinted windows. When the car stopped, Jessie reached for the door, only for Mikhail to catch her wrist gently. "No," he said. "Tonight is different." He slipped a silk blindfold over her eyes. The darkness stole her breath. "This is a test of trust. Can you do that, Solnishko?" His voice wrapped around her, low and calm. Jessie surprised herself with how steady her "yes" came out. He guided her inside, the hum of muffled music and soft laughter filtering through her senses. When the blindfold came off, the world around her felt like stepping into a secret whispered between powerful men. The club didn't have a name. It didn't need one. Tucked beneath Manhattan's glittering surface, it catered to desires most people would never admit aloud. The lighting was dim, golden, intimate. She saw masked faces, bodies draped in couture and shadows, indulgence simmering beneath every movement. But Mikhail wasn't watching them. He was watching her. "I won't hurt you," he said simply. And something inside her, the part always clenching, always bracing, finally loosened. He didn't push her, didn't force. Instead, he guided her through a night crafted with unnerving precision, showing her edges of herself she'd never dared explore. There were no explicit acts that crossed lines, only the slow, intoxicating surrender of control to a man who seemed to know exactly how to steady her trembling heart. The paradox struck her hardest. Relinquishing power made her feel powerful. For someone who had spent her whole life holding everything together, her mother, her finances, her emotions, being allowed to fall was its own liberation. Afterward, they sat alone in a private room, Jessie still catching her breath, the world humming quietly beneath her skin. Mikhail studied her with unreadable intensity. "You surprised yourself tonight," he murmured. She didn't deny it. He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead, unexpectedly gentle, almost reverent. Dangerous. Jessie felt the warning rise in her chest. Don't get attached. This is business. But her heart, traitorous thing it was, had already started rewriting the rules. At 3 a.m. one restless night, Jessie slipped out of bed, the sheets still warm from where Mikhail had been asleep moments before. The penthouse felt cavernous in the dark, each polished surface reflecting faint city glow. She wandered aimlessly until she ended up outside his study, the one room he never invited her into. The door was cracked. Soft light spilled out. Inside, Mikhail stood with his back to her, shoulders tense, head bowed. In his hand, he held a small framed photograph. Jessie stepped closer before she realized what she was doing. The picture showed a young boy, smiling, dark-haired, eyes bright and unburdened by the shadowy world his future would inhabit. Mikhail didn't turn, but his voice was low, raw. "My brother." Jessie froze. "He was 8 when they killed him," Mikhail continued. "Our father's enemies. I was 16. The air thickened with the weight of something ancient and unhealed. I made them all pay," he said, turning the photo face down on the desk. Every single one. When he finally faced her, his eyes were oceans, vast, empty, and endless, filled with things no one should carry. The man she had seen command entire rooms now looked unbearably human, broken in a way she understood too well. Jessie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her grief lived in different memories, hospitals, slow decay, whispered apologies, but the shape of loss was the same. Something shifted in the space between them. After that night, Mikhail spoke to her differently. Not just orders or instructions, but real conversations, about her art, about the childhood he'd buried, about dreams neither of them believed they deserved. The games continued, yes. But now they were threaded with intimacy, unspoken, fragile, dangerous. Jessie knew she should be afraid. Instead, for the first time, she felt seen. Jessie woke to the soft rise and fall of Mikhail's breath, the pale morning light spilling across the sheets like a confession spread out in gold. Somewhere along the way, their arrangement had shifted. No longer separate bedrooms, no more rehearsed distance. Now she slept beside him, wrapped in the warmth of a body that terrified half the city. She lay still, watching him. Asleep, he didn't look like a man who'd ordered executions or made deals that ended in blood. He looked younger, unguarded, almost peaceful. A dark curl had fallen across his forehead. She resisted the urge to brush it away. The realization crept up quietly, like the tide slipping over bare feet. I'm in love with him. The thought struck hard enough to steal her breath. Ridiculous, impossible fantasies unfurled before she could stop them. Mikhail leaving the organization, the two of them vanishing into a life where danger didn't stalk every shadow. She imagined painting again, color returning to her hands, while he learned to be something other than the man everyone feared. She imagined breakfasts, laughter, soft mornings like this one. Then she crushed the fantasies with a brutal internal slap. Stupid, naive, dangerous. She was living on borrowed time, bound by a contract with a literal expiration date. Mikhail Volkov didn't fall in love. He collected people until they bored him. And yet, his smiles, rare as breaking dawn, felt like sunlight. His touch, possessive but careful, made her feel treasured in a way she'd never known. He remembered everything she said about her art, her mother, her dreams. Maybe, just maybe, she could be the one to change him. The thought was as intoxicating as it was lethal. Jessie returned late from visiting her mother, who was thriving now, laughing, eating, even making sarcastic jokes again. The doctors marveled at her turnaround, and every time Jessie saw her smile, it sharpened the fear twisting in her chest. Her mother was getting better because Jessie had sold 6 months of her life. When she stepped into the penthouse, the lights were dim, the air heavy with quiet. She moved carefully down the hallway, and stopped. Mikhail's office door was slightly ajar. His voice drifted through the crack, low and sharp. He spoke in Russian at first, fast, clipped. Then, switching to English, he said words that froze Jessie in place. 6 months, Dmitri. Then I'll be done with her. Jessie's heart slammed against her ribs. She's been entertaining, Mikhail continued, the tone almost bored. But I'm already growing tired. Have you found her replacement yet? Her breath left her in a silent, violent rush. The corridor warped. The edges of her vision pulsed. Entertaining. Growing bored. Replacement. The words sliced through her with clinical precision. She was a contract. A toy. A possession. Nothing more. Everything she'd felt, every flicker of tenderness she'd convinced herself came from him, was only hers. Carefully, she stepped back from the door before he noticed her. She walked, numb, toward the guest bathroom, closing the door quietly behind her. The sound of the lock sliding into place shattered her last thin layer of composure. She sank onto the cold tile floor, pressing a fist against her mouth to muffle the sobs. Her reflection in the mirror above the sink looked like a stranger, eyes red, skin pale, a woman hollowed out by her own foolishness. 2 months left on the contract. 2 months before Mikhail discarded her like worn-out silk. How do you protect a heart that's already given itself away? The smart choice was clear. Pull back, create distance, survive the final months, take the money, and disappear. Let the fantasy die before it devoured her. But Jessie wasn't smart. Not when it came to him. Not anymore. Instead of retreating, she clung harder. She became addicted to the burn of his attention, the surge of electricity in the space between command and obedience. Even knowing he planned to replace her, she craved every second. She began pushing boundaries, seeking small ways to make herself indispensable. She learned the names of his lieutenants, memorized details about their families. She quietly eased conversations at events, redirecting tensions before they escalated. She adjusted strategies mid-dinner, whispering observations into Mikhail's ear that made him pause, reassess, act. In private, she surrendered fully to the games he crafted for them, giving herself so completely that sometimes she forgot where she ended and he began. She searched his eyes for signs she mattered, anything, however small. But love, unreciprocated and desperate, was a hunger without mercy. One night, after a gala where she'd maneuvered social dynamics flawlessly, Mikhail pulled her into his office. He studied her, curious, calculating, something unreadable simmering under the surface. Then his hand rose to her throat, not squeezing, just resting there, a reminder of power, of rules she was beginning to forget. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jessie," he murmured, his thumb brushing her pulse. "Getting attached is against the rules." Her voice betrayed her with its softness. "I'm not attached. I'm just earning my money." His eyes darkened, suspicion or amusement. She couldn't tell which. He didn't believe her. She wasn't sure he needed to. Maybe he enjoyed the ache he caused. Maybe that was part of his game too. 3 weeks before the contract ended, chaos arrived before dawn. Jessie woke to raised voices, harsh, clipped Russian echoing down the marble hallway. She slipped from Mikhail's bed, wrapped her silk robe around her shaking body, and crept toward the source. Dmitri stood in the living room with 2 lieutenants, their faces carved from storm clouds. Mikhail paced like a caged predator. "It was Kozlov," Dmitri said. "He intercepted the shipment. 2 million gone." Jessie's breath caught. Another lieutenant added, "He left a message. He thinks you're distracted." Soft, a pointed silence followed. "It's because of her. Kozlov knows about the girl." Jessie froze behind the column. "Her. He sees her as a vulnerability," Dmitri continued. "A way to bring you down." The room went still. And then Mikhail's voice, cold enough to frost glass. "Then we'll use that." Jessie felt her stomach drop. Mikhail stopped pacing, jaw tightening. "Set up a meeting. Tell Kozlov I'm willing to negotiate." The word negotiate twisted in the air, sharp and final. Jessie understood the unspoken truth before anyone said it. He planned to trade her, offer her up like a bargaining chip, sacrifice her to show he was still the man everyone feared. Her chest hollowed out. She pressed a hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. This was the world he lived in, the world she had stepped into believing she could survive. Or worse, believing she could matter. That evening, Mikhail came to her room without knocking. Jessie braced herself for commands, orders, cold logic. Instead, when he shut the door, something shifted. He touched her cheek with trembling fingers. Trembling. Mikhail Volkov did not tremble. He kissed her like the world was ending and she was the only thing worth remembering. No calculation, no control, just raw need. When he lifted her into his arms, his movements were reverent, almost worshipful. They made love like he was memorizing her. Like every second mattered more than the last. Like this was goodbye. He whispered in Russian, soft, untranslatable words against her throat. Words that sounded like prayers and curses tangled together. Jessie felt it in her bones. This was different. She didn't understand why. She only knew she didn't want it to end. Afterward, they lay tangled in darkness, his arm around her waist, his breath warm against the back of her neck. Jessie felt suspended in a fragile, impossible peace. Then he spoke. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "you'll meet Viktor Kozlov with me." A cold wave washed over her. "You'll smile," he continued. "Make him believe you're mine completely." Her voice wavered. "And then..." The pause stretched long and thin, an answer in itself. "Then you'll leave with him." Her heart slammed to a stop. "You're trading me." Not a question. A wound. He exhaled, a harsh, ragged sound. "It's the only way to protect what I've built." "Your empire," she whispered bitterly. "That is the world I live in, Jessie. I warned you about getting your heart involved." The words sliced deeper because they were true. She had gotten attached. She had fallen in love with a man who would hand her over to a monster just to maintain power. And she could refuse, yes, but refusal in his world didn't mean freedom. It meant disappearing in far uglier ways. It hit her with brutal clarity. This had always been the reality under their arrangement. She had simply been too hopeful to see it. Silence suffocated the room. Jessie felt the world tilting under her, everything she believed about them cracking clean down the middle. Then Mikhail pushed up on one elbow, reached for the lamp, and turned on the light. The sudden brightness exposed everything. His bare chest, her trembling hands, the raw devastation carved across his face. "Jessie," he said quietly, "there is another option." Her breath hitched. He looked at her like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, finally ready to jump. "There's a house in Argentina," he said, "near the coast, under new identities." She stared at him. "You're asking me to run?" "Not asking." His voice cracked. Mikhail Volkov's voice cracked. "I'm saying we can leave tonight. Your empire. Let it burn," he snapped, pain lacing every word. "I've never been less serious about anything in my life." A broken laugh escaped him. Mikhail Volkov doesn't run. Doesn't sacrifice an empire for one woman. "Then why?" "God help me, Jessie." His chest heaved. "You've made me want to." The room pulsed around her. He loved her. Not gently, not cleanly, but fiercely, dangerously, in the only way a man like him could love. And the weight of that love threatened to crush them both. He laid out the choices like cards on a table. Run. They disappear. He abandons everything he built, everything he avenged. They live hunted, shadows of themselves. His brother's death. Meaningless. Trade her. She survives a little while, then dies at Kozlov's hands. Mikhail keeps his empire but lives forever with her ghost. Face Kozlov together. They likely die. but they die on their terms. Jessie looked at him, this powerful, ruthless, beautiful man laid bare and terrified. She felt her fear, her love, her doom all braided into one impossible truth. Her voice was steady when it finally came. Then we face him together. Not because she was brave, not because she wanted to die, but because loving him meant being willing to. The sun had barely crested the horizon when their car rolled to a stop beside the abandoned warehouse. Dawn spilled over the Hudson, turning the river into molten silver, beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel. The wind carried the sharp scent of salt water and metal, and the building looming before them looked like a skeleton picked clean by time. Broken windows, rusted beams, the hum of distant traffic, indifferent to what might happen inside these crumbling walls. Jessie stepped out first. The cold bit through the thin red dress, its silk clinging to her like armor disguised as elegance. Her heels clicked against cracked concrete, each step a reminder that she was walking willingly into the lion's den. The river lapped softly against the pier, the only gentle sound in a world that felt wired for violence. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain the men waiting inside could hear it. Her hands shook, wild, uncontrollable, until Mikhail reached out and took one. His grip was steady, warm, grounding. A quiet claim whispered through touch alone. She looked at him, and in his eyes she found neither fear nor calculation, only certainty. Whatever happened today, they would face it together. The warehouse doors creaked open. Inside, light slanted through jagged panes of broken glass, catching dust in shimmering columns. Shadows stretched long and sharp across the concrete floor, moving as the figures within shifted. Black cars rolled up behind them, sleek, dangerous. Doors opened in unison. Armed men fanned out with rehearsed precision. And then Viktor Kozlov stepped forward. He was impeccably dressed, the cut of his suit immaculate despite the grime around them. Expensive cologne drifted from him, sharp, crisp, masking something sour beneath. His smile was a predator's grin, too wide, too confident. His eyes slid over Jessie slowly, greedily, as if mentally appraising her worth. "So this," Kozlov purred, "is the woman who brought down the great Mikhail Volkov." Kozlov's men formed a loose circle, guns angled just low enough to be subtle but close enough to be lethal. Jessie felt the weight of every barrel, every hostile gaze. She resisted the instinct to curl into Mikhail's side. Kozlov approached with casual arrogance, stopping just a few feet away. "I assume we are here to finalize the terms," he said. "You hand her over, I give you back your territory." Balance restored. His tone made Jessie feel like an object being appraised at an auction. Mikhail didn't flinch. His hand found the small of her back, not possessive but protective. "A silent time here." When he spoke, his voice was calm and devastatingly clear. "She is extraordinary," he said, "which is why I'm keeping her." Shock rippled through the room. Kozlov's smile thinned. "That's not the deal." "The deal," Mikhail responded, "has changed." Dmitri took a small step forward, loyal, unreadable, but Kozlov's men immediately leveled their guns at him. Tension snapped like a wire pulled taut. Kozlov tilted his head. "This is not a negotiation you can afford to lose, Volkov." Mikhail reached into his coat slowly, deliberately. Guns cocked all around them, but instead of pulling a weapon, he withdrew a small detonator. Jessie's breath caught in her throat. "This entire warehouse," Mikhail said evenly, "is wired with enough explosives to level 3 city blocks." Kozlov's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "No," Mikhail murmured. I'm not. A beat of stunned silence. And in case you're wondering, my assets have already been moved offshore, and certain evidence has been sent to the FBI. If I die right now, everything burns with me. Kozlov studied him carefully. The shift in the room was almost physical, fear sliding beneath bravado. Mikhail's voice softened, but only barely. I've spent 20 years building an empire, he said. Do you think I wouldn't burn it all down for one woman who makes me feel human again? The truth in his voice was unmistakable. He wasn't bluffing. He had chosen her. The warehouse was so quiet Jessie could hear her own pulse. Kozlov stared at Mikhail for a long, dangerous stretch of time, calculating. A man accustomed to power, to dominance, to submission from others, now forced to consider whether another man was willing to lose everything just to defy him. Jessie barely breathed. Finally, Kozlov's lips curved into something between a smirk and a snarl. You're insane, Volkov, he muttered. But beneath the disdain was something else, something like grudging respect. He stepped back, lowering his chin in a small, mocking nod. Fine. Keep your woman. Jessie exhaled shakily. Kozlov lifted a hand, signaling his men. But you're out, he said. No territory, no product, no influence. You disappear, or I'll make you disappear. Mikhail's response was immediate. Done. It wasn't defeat. It was choice. Kozlov turned on his heel and walked away, his entourage flowing behind him like a shadow. The warehouse doors slammed shut. The silence they left behind felt impossibly heavy. Jessie's knees nearly buckled. Mikhail caught her, pulling her close as they stepped out into the growing dawn. His arm wrapped around her, not like a claim, not like possession, like a man who had given up the world to keep her safe. They walked together toward the river's edge, the rising sun painting the water gold. They had survived. But nothing would ever be the same. The Brooklyn safe house was the opposite of everything they had just left behind. No marble floors, no gleaming chandeliers, no men with guns in the hallway. Just a small, anonymous apartment with peeling paint and mismatched furniture. A hideout meant to be forgotten, swallowed by the endless sprawl of the city. The door clicked shut behind them, and silence took hold. Heavy, breathless, suffocating silence. They both collapsed into it. Jessie sank onto the edge of a narrow sofa, her body trembling with the delayed shock of survival. Mikhail stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the street below through a thin slit in the blinds. Hours passed like that. No words, just the quiet aftermath of everything they almost lost. When the adrenaline drained away, exhaustion flooded in. Jessie wrapped her arms around herself, realizing she was cold, but the cold wasn't from the room. It was from understanding the enormity of what had just happened. He gave up everything for her. 20 years of building an empire, gone in a single moment. 20 years of constructing a kingdom out of fear and reputation, a monument to the pain of losing his brother. And now it meant nothing. He had traded it all so she could keep breathing. The weight of that sacrifice pressed down on her chest until she could barely inhale. Finally, when the silence became unbearable, she whispered, "Why?" Mikhail didn't turn immediately. When he did, his face was stark, stripped of every mask. "I told you," he said quietly. "You made me feel human." He walked toward her slowly, each step heavy with truth. "I spent 20 years becoming a monster, Jessie. And I was good at it." Her breath caught. "But then you walked into my world," he said, sitting beside her, "and reminded me what I'd lost, what I'd buried." His voice wasn't trembling, but something inside it broke open. And Jessie understood. Monsters don't stop being monsters for free. He had paid a price she could never repay. Jessie insisted on seeing her mother before they disappeared. It wasn't a negotiation, it was the one thing she couldn't leave unfinished. Mikhail agreed without hesitation. He arranged everything with clinical precision. A different car, a different driver, different entry points. No one could follow, no one could trace their steps. Jessie noticed how easily he created safety, how instinctively he analyzed risk. A man doesn't stop being who he was overnight. The hospital smelled the same as always. Sterile air, faint bleach, the lingering shadow of too many goodbyes. But when Jessie walked into her mother's private room, the sight that met her nearly knocked her to her knees. Her mother looked healthier than she had in months. Rosy cheeks, clearer eyes, strength returning to fingers that had once felt like bird bones. Jessie knew why. The treatments, the specialists, the upgraded care. Mikhail had made sure of it. Her mother smiled faintly. "You look different." Jessie's throat closed. "I am different." Her mother squeezed her hand gently. Encouraging, steady. "Tell me." "I can't tell you everything," Jessie whispered. "But I met someone." Her mother's brow lifted knowingly. "Dangerous." Jessie nodded once. "Does he love you?" Jessie hesitated. Love felt too small a word for what she and Mikhail had survived. "Yes," she finally said. "But it's complicated." Her mother gave a soft laugh, full of wisdom and worn edges. "Love isn't safe, honey. It never has been." She brushed a thumb over Jessie's knuckles. "The real question is this. Does he make you more yourself or less?" Jessie felt something hot rise in her chest. "More," she said. "Terrifyingly more." Her mother studied her, eyes watery with pride and worry mingled together. "Then go," she whispered. "Live. Be brave." Jessie leaned down and hugged her, tears slipping down her cheeks. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a release, a blessing, a permission she didn't know she needed. As Jessie stepped out of the room, she understood. Sacrifice cut both ways. Her mother was letting her go, and Jessie was choosing a life she could never return from. The next 48 hours blurred into logistics. New passports, new names, cash in envelopes thick enough to anchor a ship. Mikhail's remaining loyal contacts, those who valued him more than his power, worked quietly to secure safe passage. Even stripped of his empire, he still commanded respect that couldn't be stolen. Jessie watched him move through each step with surgical focus. There was no hesitation, no complaint, no looking back. That frightened her more than anything. A man who could sever himself from his past so completely could just as easily sever himself from her one day. On their final night in New York, they stood on a rooftop overlooking the skyline. Lights glittered across the city, cold and distant, like indifferent stars. "Do you regret it?" Jessie asked softly. Mikhail didn't answer right away. The breeze lifted the edge of his jacket. "Ask me in a year," he said finally. "When the adrenaline fades. When reality sets in." He turned to her fully. "But right now, no. I've never felt more alive than when I chose you over everything." Her breath trembled. Not out of fear, out of the fragile hope blooming inside her. They weren't master and possession anymore. Weren't predator and prey. Not even sinner and savior. They were two people who had found something worth dying for, and had chosen to live for it instead. Just before dawn, They boarded the small private plane waiting on a secluded runway. Jessie buckled in. Mikhail took her hand. New York shrank beneath them, dissolving into distance and cloud. And neither of them let go. The villa clung to the hillside like something half-dreamed. White stone walls, blue shutters, a terrace stretching toward the endless Mediterranean. Not the escape Mikhail once promised in Argentina, but somewhere that felt close enough to nowhere and everywhere at the same time. A place where no one knew their names. Most mornings, Jessie woke to sunlight spilling over the sheets and the sound of waves brushing the rocky shoreline below. She'd slip out of bed, tie her hair back, and step onto the terrace with her sketchbook. Not to chase commissions. Not to produce anything for anyone else. Just to paint for the first time in her life. The sea became her muse. Its moods, its colors, its secrets. Her art grew bolder, darker, more honest, no longer caged by practicalities or fear. She painted like someone who had faced death and chosen to live anyway. Mikhail joined her every morning, a cup of black coffee in hand, reading worn collections of Russian poetry he hadn't touched since boyhood. Sometimes he read aloud to her, low Russian syllables rolling in the warm air like another language entirely, one that wasn't meant to be understood, only felt. More often he just watched her work, the lines of his face softening into something that still startled her. Their life had become something shockingly domestic. They cooked dinner together, Mikhail chopping vegetables with military precision while Jessie teased him for treating onions like enemies. They took long walks along the cliffside, rarely speaking, simply letting the world stay quiet around them. But the adjustment wasn't simple for him. Jessie noticed moments when he'd stare at the horizon too long, tension coiling in his shoulders, restlessness creeping in like a shadow, old instincts rising, scanning exits, sensing threats that weren't there. For a man who once commanded an empire, stillness didn't come naturally. Yet he kept choosing it, choosing her, choosing peace over the power that once defined him. Jessie felt the change in herself, too. She was no longer the woman drowning in responsibility back in New York, carrying her mother's illness and her own survival like twin burdens. Here, she was discovering herself without duty shredding the edges of her life. And for the first time, surrender didn't feel like losing, just letting herself be held, fully, bravely, without apology. No matter how bright the Mediterranean sun shone, some shadows were long enough to follow them across oceans. They both knew Kozlov's mercy had an expiration date. Men like Mikhail didn't simply vanish. Empires didn't die quietly. And enemies didn't forget humiliation. Danger wasn't an if. It was a when. The ghosts visited at night first. Mikhail would wake abruptly, breath harsh and uneven, eyes unfocused. Jessie could feel the tremors in his hands as he pushed himself upright. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The dreams were always the same. His brother, dying in his arms. The empire he built in that grief. The guilt of walking away from the last meaning that grief had given his life. Jessie would hold him until the tremors faded. Press her cheek against his back. Remind him wordlessly that he wasn't alone anymore. But she had her own nightmares. The warehouse. The guns. Kozlov's cold, amused stare. The moment she thought Mikhail would die in front of her. The moment she realized she'd die with him if she had to. In the mornings, they prepared, not out of paranoia, but realism. Mikhail mapped escape routes around the villa. Showed her how to fire a gun with steady hands. How to read danger in silence, in movement, in instinct. Jessie listened. Learned. Not because she wanted to live in fear, but because loving him meant understanding his world, not pretending it didn't exist. Their love didn't lie to them. It didn't promise safety or permanence. It promised truth. And the truth was that happiness built in the shadow of violence was still happiness. Maybe even a braver kind. They chose to live anyway, to laugh, paint, cook, walk, knowing each sunrise was not guaranteed. Choosing joy in spite of the cost made it shine brighter. One evening, the sky stained pink and gold, Mikhail found Jessie on the terrace, paint smudged on her fingers. He held a folder in his hand, thin, elegant, dangerous in the way only possibilities can be. "Jessie," he said gently, "we need to talk." She looked up, heart tightening at the seriousness in his eyes. He set the folder on the table between them. Inside, plane tickets, new documents, fresh identities. We could run again. Keep moving. New place, new names, every few months. Stay ahead of whatever comes. Jessie inhaled slowly, then looked around them. The wild rosemary climbing the villa walls, the ocean glimmering below, the canvases stacked by the door, each one stamped with the life they built here. "Or," she said softly, "we could stay." Mikhail's jaw tightened. Staying is riskier. Running forever isn't living. She stepped closer. "We can live until we can't. Isn't that better than surviving without ever stopping to breathe?" He searched her face, as if looking for the fear she'd learned to carry differently now. "Better to have loved dangerously," she whispered, "than to spend your life safe and empty." Mikhail's breath left him in a slow exhale, a surrender, but not the broken kind. The choosing kind. He pulled her into his arms. "We'll stay," he murmured. "We'll build something real. And when danger comes, if it comes, we'll face it together," she finished. "Just like they had in the warehouse." And the sea kept whispering below, carrying their promise into the twilight. Golden hours softened the world, bathing the villa in a warm glow. The Mediterranean shimmered below the cliffs, waves rolling in slow, steady breaths. A warm breeze drifted over the terrace, carrying sea salt and rosemary. Jessie stood at the railing, watching the sun slide toward the horizon like a coin sinking through water. Mikhail joined her quietly, hands slipping into his pockets. For a long moment, they simply stood together, shadows stretching long behind them. Jessie broke the silence first. It was the same question she'd asked in the beginning, though back then she'd asked it half-jokingly, never expecting a real answer. "Do you regret it? Giving up everything?" This time, the question wasn't a test. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity. It was love. Mikhail didn't speak right away. He leaned on the railing, eyes tracking the sun instead of her. "I used to think power was everything," he began. "Control, territory, fear." His voice was calm, almost reflective. "I built an empire on my brother's grave. Told myself every brutal choice gave his death meaning. A breath. Slow. Heavy. But it was a monument to rage," he said. "A beautiful cage I locked myself in because I didn't know how to live without anger." Jessie turned toward him. His profile was softened by the gold light, but his eyes held years, decades, of ghosts. "Then you came," he said, "and you taught me something far more dangerous." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "That some things are worth surrendering for." He finally looked at her, not as a man stripped of power, but as one who had chosen what mattered. Being human, vulnerable, open, capable of love, that takes more strength than being a monster ever did. Jessie felt something inside her loosen, something she'd been holding far longer than she understood. "I thought I was strong," she said, "taking care of everyone, carrying every burden, controlling everything so nothing could fall apart." She touched his hand lightly. "But I was just afraid of letting go, afraid of trusting anyone." He threaded his fingers through hers. "You taught me surrender isn't weakness," she whispered. "It's courage. The bravest thing is letting someone hold your heart." For a moment, the world felt very still. Just them, the sea, the fading sun. They hadn't saved each other in some fairy tale way. They'd saved each other in the messy, painful, terrifying way real people do, by forcing each other to confront who they had been and who they could choose to become. Mikhail reached into his back pocket, the motion slow, almost reverent. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn, creased, softened at the edges. Jessie recognized it instantly. The original contract. 6 months. $500,000. Terms and conditions. The beginning of everything and nothing. He laid it on the terrace table between them. "It expired 3 months ago," he said quietly. "You're free. You've been free." The truth of that hit her with surprising force. Somewhere along the way she had stopped thinking about contracts, terms, or escape routes. Somewhere along the way she had made her choice without noticing. Mikhail extended a lighter to her. "Burn it. Or keep it. Your choice." Jessie picked up the contract. The paper felt lighter than she remembered, as if the weight had always been in her mind, not her hands. She saw her own signature near the bottom, sharp, tight, desperate. The signature of a woman who had been drowning. That woman no longer existed. She flicked the lighter. A small flame bloomed. The paper curled, darkened, then caught fire, orange heat eating away the ink, the past, the girl she used to be. She held it until it burned down to safe ash and set it in a dish on the table. "No more contracts," Jessie said softly. "Just choice. Every day, choosing this." Mikhail stepped close, cupped her face gently. "Every day," he echoed. "Choosing you." The breeze carried the ashes off the terrace, tiny ghosts dissolving into open sky. He kissed her then. Not with desperation, not with possession. A kiss of presence, of truth. The kiss of two people who had survived themselves and each other, and chosen to keep going. Jessie returned to her easel, the canvas waiting in the last of the golden light. She lifted her brush, the colors reflecting the sunset, reds bleeding into gold, gold dissolving into dusk. Mikhail leaned against the doorway, watching her with the same wonder he always did. The same expression he wore the first time he saw her paint in silence, seeing a part of her he could never own, only witness. It was ordinary. It was extraordinary. They both knew danger still lived somewhere beyond the horizon. Kozlov's mercy was conditional. The past was patient. No safe walls existed, no guarantees. But they had stopped measuring life by how long it might last. They measured it by what it meant. And right now it meant this. Choosing love over safety. Choosing vulnerability over power. Choosing each other. Eyes open, hearts open. Jessie felt the words rise inside her, not spoken aloud, but pulsing through her like truth. People ask what love is worth, what you'd sacrifice for it. The question isn't what you'd give up. It's what you'd become. I became someone brave enough to love a monster until he remembered he was human. He became someone brave enough to be loved back. The sky turned red and gold, colors spilling across the sea like paint across canvas. Their silhouettes merged on the terrace, two figures held by fading light. And as the Mediterranean stretched endlessly before them, the day slipped into night. What would you risk for love? What would you surrender? Jessie Monroe risked everything for $500,000. She surrendered her heart to a dangerous man she was never supposed to love. And in the end, she discovered that the most dangerous game isn't about power or control. It's about letting your heart become the ultimate stake, where losing means losing everything. But maybe winning means winning everything, too. Sometimes love costs an empire. Sometimes it costs your safety, your certainty, your carefully controlled life. The real question is, what are you willing to pay? And what are you brave enough to become? If this story touched you, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And hit that subscribe button, because your support keeps these stories alive. Love stories that's dangerous, raw, and impossibly beautiful. Because the heart wants what it wants, even when it could destroy you.